Node sales are happening left and right, and many of our favorite projects are now offering nodes. But what are they? What do they do? And are they good investment opportunities? This is Sasha with Arcanum Ventures. I'm here with my co-founder Carmelo, and today we're going to talk a bit about nodes and node sales. Carmelo, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Excited to talk about this growing trend. I think it's been around for several months now, and we've been studying it religiously because, we've been working on some node sales ourselves, but we can get into that later. But yeah, we've been doing quite a bit of research, and it's pretty exciting and a little bit worrying as well. I think we've also covered a few node sale videos or node sale project raises for our 10-minute eye test in the last few weeks. So I think one of the biggest questions are, what are these node sales and what are the nodes that they're referring to? And obviously anybody that knows anything about blockchain knows that nodes predate blockchain itself. They're just parts of a network. They're conduits in a network that connect different vectors or points. So I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings in this space. Like Ethereum's had nodes, Binance Smart Chain even has its own centralized nodes, but there's never been a blockchain or a token or anything that's had its own node sales until this year, basically, or the last 12 months, let's say. So for the purpose of this video, I think we're talking more about these recent node sales where they're actually auctioning off different types of nodes for application chains, which are basically layer 2s or even layer 3s that are built above layer 1s and layer 2s. So it's a bit interesting why this has become a major narrative. And we're seeing projects launch and raise sometimes $100 million with these node sales. So oof. I don't know about you, but I think this might be one of the big motivators behind launching a node sale. So I'm pretty excited to dive into this, but I wanted to ask you, what do you know about the different types of projects out there? What sort of node sales are happening and what niches are they typically covering?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different new blockchains that are coming to market. And like you said, application chain is the new meta. And this is something that you and I also always believed in, the idea of using blockchain infrastructure to improve an existing business or product. So it makes sense that some of these companies would be launching their own custom-built bespoke blockchain networks for their ecosystem or their product. And this is the rise of the application chain era, really. And in order to do that, sometimes it makes sense to distribute a network of nodes and have a level of decentralization in there, because some of these nodes that are being distributed or sold, they have very specific functionalities or responsibilities in adding security to the network, validating transactions, and then packaging transactions to roll them up into the parent network. And so we're seeing this happen for a lot of different types of projects. More notably recently around gaming ecosystem chains and also AI edge compute networks, which makes sense if you think about an edge computing network where an individual node might be a person or an organization with some, let's say, NVIDIA H100s or different types of GPU processors that can provide that information or that processing power. So this is what we're really seeing it for. It's funny because it's going down the road of crowdsourced contribution, which is what we want to see in crypto and in blockchain. But there's some very, very real drawbacks to node sales, and there's a bit of a bait and switch in some cases. But yeah, as far as what's happening on the node networks, there are many different types of nodes being offered. And some of them are full nodes, like you might relate back to Bitcoin or Ethereum. Some are light nodes, and some aren't even nodes in particular. But Carmelo, I think you might be familiar with a couple of these examples, right? What are some ridiculous examples of node sales that you've seen as far as the node actually being functional?
I don't know if any of them are functional, but I think the brief history in node sales, Gala Games maybe kicked off the frenzy, even though they had a little bit of a less, an atypical structure. Not really. It was kind of like the proto launch, and then I think Psy Games last December really kicked it off. The current node sale trend that was a little bit crazy. Like you said, gaming chains have been dominating this narrative. So I don't know why we need so many gaming chains, but obviously some of them are merited, but others, you and I always say, why don't they just launch with a pre-existing gaming focused ecosystem like Ronin Chain or Arbitrum or Immutable, or one of these ones that are their claim to fame is working with gaming ecosystems. So I think yeah, it's a little bit interesting. And you mentioned like the DPIN and the AI as well. So there's also like different sub narratives in here. I think some of the justifiable large raises have been like Carve or Ether. Like you said, that they work, the nodes might represent computational power. But as far, one thing that we're interested in, or you and I always talk about, a lot of these nodes, if you can't describe what they do in a few sentences, they feel a little bit suspicious. And you always hear the typical suspects like, oh, this will decentralize security, or this will help be a guardian. They always have these cool names like guardian or sentry node or observer node. And, I've seen, from what you've seen, nobody really does a good job of explaining why these need to exist and what they're actually doing. And that brings up another point too. We always ask, or when we're dissecting a white paper, a node paper, whatever you want to call it, like what are the technical specs to run a node? How can I actually support this ecosystem aside from just paying you cash or Ethereum or some crypto token in receiving a node as part of a node sale? How do I support the network? Do I just collect money? Do I have to have a beast of a computer or a mining computer? So do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's kind of like a telltale sign on what the node actually does, right? And so there are a lot of node networks being launched on primarily Arbitrum and ZK Sync. Those are the two hot ones right now. And for different reasons, there's benefits and drawbacks to launching a node network on your own L2 or L3 built on either of those networks. And we released an article on node sales and what they actually do. And you make sure to visit our website to learn more about that. But you're right. There's like this constant narrative of these nodes can add decentralization to a network. Well, is that important in the context of some of these projects or some of these companies that are launching these networks? But there's more interesting things around ownership. There's more interesting things around like responsibility and consensus. In the case of Arbitrum, if anyone actually bothers to, dive into some of the technical documentation and read about the Arbitrum Orbit chain stack, you will see that there are some real benefits to launching a node network if you develop on that stack, because it can add to the network security. There's an added layer of security that rolls up with the consensus on Arbitrum and then before it gets to Ethereum. So it adds this like sort of challenge or attestation window that allows sort of faulty transactions or malfeasance on the network to be identified before it's rolled up into the larger parent network. So there are real benefits there. And that can be good in networks that have to have some criticality around security. But if it's for something like, a DPIN network that's maybe just releasing like a little bit of information from a sensor, I don't really know. Like, what can you hack in a sensor, like a temperature sensor or something? And how is that? What kind of impact is that going to have on the larger ecosystem? But yeah, there's a lot of different narratives being thrown around, but I think that's a big one around them. Ownership is another big one. And then obviously one of the biggest ones that we've run into a lot of times speaking with people around node sales is the fundraising and the sheer amount of money that can come from a node sale that we've seen in the past. So like, based on your experience, what have you seen as far as like some of these numbers, metrics, and more notable sales? And how does it tie into the meta of these networks actually launching nodes?
I think one of the first ones that really came to my attention was Sophon Network, and that one raised an astronomical amount of funds. I think they had 200,000 nodes, which is a lot. For this, for real decentralization, you really need maybe 4, 5, 10,000 nodes max, but 200,000 really stuck out as something maybe unnecessary, especially when they were going for, on average, a few $1,000s a pop. Maybe 1,000 to 2,000 was like a sweet spot range. So they raised an absurd amount of money. And I think this really, how it works in crypto. Everybody sees one thing work really well. Wow, they raised a lot of money. How can I get in on this action? So I think this is, you mentioned decentralization, which is a buzzword, but it's also something of great importance to some investors like ourselves. Like that's one of the things we look to. And then actual ownership as a benefit for owning a node, really feeling like you have a stake in the ecosystem. But I think, and I think you might agree that fundraising, raising a lot of money is probably the primary motivation behind launching a node sale now. And you and I have even spoken to some potential node sale clients. We ask them straight up, what is the primary motivation for launching a node sale, for building your own application chain? And they're like, to be honest, we don't know what the nodes will do or what we want them to do yet, but we know that we want to have them and we know we want to use them to raise funds. So I think it's a little bit damning for the space, because this is usually how it goes. We latch on to narratives that are attractive, that are people are talking about. There's a lot of buzz because that comes with this free marketing. But if you live and die by these trends, then we see now that node sales have cooled off a little bit, and maybe that has something to do with the markets not being as exciting as they were in Q2 or Q1. But right now they're cooling off a little bit, and now all these node sales, people are a little bit worried about them, but I think you and I will still maintain that node sales are a net benefit for the space and they should exist. But, we have to be very vigilant about who's doing these node sales and what we need to look for, and figuring out why these nodes exist and are they worth it? Not just from like a return on interest, like an ROI perspective, but like, do these need to exist? And am I actually helping do good? Am I helping support a network that's doing good? So I think it's a little bit interesting, and there's more developments coming, and we're going to cover this in future videos, I'm sure. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you guys stick around, we've got another video coming up that's titled 5 Things to Look For in a Node Sale. We're going to dive a bit deeper around the finances of node sales, understand what the rewards look like for operating a node, and then that offsetting potentially the cost of the hardware requirements or the operational costs of running a node. But that's it for today. And Carmelo, thanks a lot for this discussion. I think at least you guys get some understanding of what node sales are, what the node networks for these distributed networks look like, why they need to be there specifically for application chains. Stay safe out there, y'all. Take care. Until next time.